If you're struggling with your blood sugar and you want to know what to do about it without medication, you've clicked on the right video. Hi, I'm Dr. Cori Stern, and welcome to my channel, Take Control of Your Health. Please watch this video to the end to get my top tips on how to help control your blood sugar naturally. So let's get started by talking about diabetes. What is it? Why is it actually bad for you? I'm always surprised when I talk to people about this problem and they know that having high blood sugar is bad and that diabetes is bad, but they don't know exactly why. And I have found that medical doctors don't really discuss this with their patients. They just tell them your blood sugar is too high and you have to take this medication. But let's talk a little bit about why it's so bad. So first of all, we're going to talk about blood sugar. We're going to call it glucose because that's what it's called when it's actually in your blood. Once you eat carbohydrates and it gets converted, broken down into sugar, it's called glucose. And glucose is then used by your body to make energy. So when we're talking about energy, we're talking about not the kind of energy you need to go running around the block, but energy in terms of running various systems, processes in your body. So the way it has to work is that you eat the food, your digestion breaks it down into glucose, and then it gets transported to the cells. It has to enter into the cells, and then the cells have little machinery in them that turn it into units of energy. Now, your cells can also make energy out of other substances like proteins, which get broken down into amino acids, and fats, which get broken down into fatty acids. But there are certain cells that can only use glucose for energy. For example, your red blood cells can only use glucose. So it is important that you do have glucose available. An interesting side note is that cancer cells need glucose to actually exist. So it's one reason why it's important to avoid eating too much sugar when you have cancer, or also to even prevent the possibility of cancer cells growing in your body. So what happens is you eat a meal, your body converts some of that into glucose. And I'll talk a little bit more about what foods are most easily converted to glucose in a few minutes. And then the glucose goes into your blood, and that's your blood sugar. And from there, it needs to get into the cells to convert to energy. But in order to get into the cell, it needs a key to open the cell door. And that key is called insulin. This is a hormone that's produced by your pancreas. So if insulin is not present for any reason, the sugar, the glucose, cannot go inside the cell. It stays in your blood. And we'll talk more about insulin in a little bit. So when the sugar can't get into the cell, when the glucose can't get into the cells, and you have high blood sugar, you have a problem because it damages the lining of your blood vessels. So sugar or glucose doesn't belong in your blood vessels. It's supposed to be transported by your blood and go into your cells. When it stays in your blood, it causes damage. It's very inflammatory, and it will cause damage to the smallest vessels first. So the vessels in your fingers and toes and your eyes. And that's why some people with high blood sugar have what's called peripheral neuropathy, where they get numbness and tingling in their hands and feet. There's something called diabetic retinopathy, where it's damaging your retina. And then it starts damaging the larger vessels. So the vessels going to your heart, to your kidneys, to every organ in your body. right? And that's why it's so bad and so dangerous. So just to give you an idea of how many people have diabetes, it's absolutely astounding. So as of the latest statistics I could find, 2019, there's at least 34.2 million people in the United States with diabetes. That's 10.5% of the population. And that's just people who have been diagnosed. There are people walking around with high blood sugar who have not been formally diagnosed, either because they're not getting, they're not going to a doctor and getting blood work, or they just haven't gone there since they developed this problem. So that's 34.2 million diagnosed with diabetes, another 88 million diagnosed with what's called pre-diabetes, which means your blood sugar is running high, but it's not yet high enough to be formally called diabetes. That's 34.5% of the population. If you add those two together, it's almost half the country, especially if you consider the people that are not diagnosed yet. Half of the United States. Worldwide, there's 463 million people as of 2019 with diabetes. Now, I look closely at the trend going back. I looked back starting from the 50s into present time. So from 1958 to 1975, it's a 17-year period, the prevalence of diabetes more than tripled. So what changed between 1958 and 1975? Well, for one thing, the introduction of high fructose corn syrup into our food supply, where slowly the sugar was being replaced with high fructose corn syrup, which is extremely, extremely toxic and is a major cause of diabetes. Then from 1996 to 2003, in a 7-year period, the rate doubled again. So what was introduced in the mid 90s that might account for this? And that was GMOs and Roundup or glyphosate, which was put into our food supply in the mid 90s. So there's been long-term studies that show a link between GMOs and diabetes, and also between glyphosate and diabetes. Glyphosate damages the pancreas, among other terrible things that it does. So GMOs and glyphosate don't only cause diabetes, there's a lot of other bad things they do. So let's just talk about what foods cause your blood sugar to go up. So when you eat carbohydrates, that's the food that breaks down into sugar, ultimately into glucose as you're digesting it. So let's talk about foods that are carbohydrates and give you some examples. So first of all, anything made out of flour. So pasta, bread, pizza crust, cake, pie crust, pretzels, donuts, cookies, pancakes, right? And if it's a food that contains flour plus added sugar, like cookies and cake and pie and donuts, then you're getting a double whammy. So these are the carbs that I just mentioned are carbs that people typically eat a lot of, at least in the US. Other grains like rice are also carbohydrates. And a lot of people ask, well, what about brown rice versus white rice? So white rice is just a refined version of brown rice where they've taken the outer hull off. But as far as how easily it turns into sugar in the body, it's not that much different. So it's true that eating unrefined grains is better for you, but when it comes to blood sugar, there's not a huge difference. So getting back to what else has carbohydrates in it, starchy vegetables like potatoes and other root vegetables, convert to glucose pretty easily. And of course, anything with sugar added. So any kind of dessert foods, candies, and then fruits have sugar in them. And some fruits have a lot of sugar, like dates. Some fruits have a little bit of sugar, like berries. But if you're struggling with blood sugar, you may not be able to eat much fruit, and you definitely shouldn't eat high sugar fruits like dates, and even bananas are high in sugar. And people get confused about that because they're like, oh, well, that's natural sugar. That's true. It's not added sugar, but it's still sugar. And when you're struggling with blood sugar, sugar is sugar. Sugar equals sugar equals sugar. Vegetables are also carbohydrates, but they're what we call a complex carbohydrate. So they break down into sugar more slowly. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in a few minutes about the speed of conversion of foods to sugar, because that's important. The faster a food breaks down into glucose, the more glucose is dumped into your bloodstream at once. And I'll talk about why that's a problem. Other things that are carbs, you have some foods that are, mixed foods like nuts and seeds. Nuts and seeds are a combination of fat and carbohydrates. And then quinoa, which many people eat as a rice substitute, is actually a seed. Quinoa is a seed. But it's high in carbohydrates. And buckwheat. Buckwheat, I'm not saying it's bad for you. Buckwheat is a very healthy food. So is quinoa. Buckwheat is technically a fruit, but it's high in carbs. So when you're struggling with your blood sugar, you cannot eat a large volume of these foods. And then let's not leave out any beverages with sugar. So fruit juices, sweetened coffee, sodas, mixed alcoholic drinks like margaritas and other sweetened drinks can be extremely high in sugar. Alcohol itself is actually also a carbohydrate, but some are higher in sugar than others. Like, for example, wine is converted to glucose more quickly than, let's say, I don't know, tequila. So I'm not telling you to run out and start drinking tequila. But if you're struggling with your blood sugar and you're going to drink alcohol, you have to look at which alcohols don't spike your blood sugar. And then we can't leave out sweeteners like honey and maple syrup and molasses, agave, brown sugar, white sugar, cane sugar, coconut sugar. So remember, I said sugar is sugar. And yes, maybe raw honey has nutrients in it, and so does maple syrup. Unrefined maple syrup and unrefined sweeteners like raw honey and unprocessed maple syrup will convert to glucose a little more slowly, but it still might be too much for your body if your body doesn't handle sugar well. I just also want to clarify quickly the difference between brown sugar and raw sugar. So a lot of people get confused about that. So raw sugar is unrefined cane sugar, right? White sugar is cane sugar that's been refined and bleached with chlorine gas. And brown and raw sugar is brown because it's not bleached. But then there's something that's brown sugar that you use to make, like, let's say, chocolate chip cookies. And that's actually white sugar with molasses added to it. Okay, so there's raw sugar and then there's brown sugar. So raw sugar is less refined than brown sugar. The more refined a sugar is, the worse it is. So, and then agave, which a lot of people think is a great substitute, really isn't. It's very high in fructose and it converts to glucose very readily. So it's not really better for you. So let's talk about how easily foods you eat convert to glucose. So some carbohydrates are complex. They convert very slowly. The body has to do more work to break them down into glucose. So like if you eat a whole bunch of broccoli, you're not going to be getting a load of glucose dumped into your blood all at once, which means that your cells will be able to take in the glucose and convert it to energy at a reasonable rate, kind of like, like a slow, steady stream of glucose that you can actually utilize for energy. But if you eat more simple carbs, especially anything with sugar added, any refined grains and flours and sugars, the body will convert it to glucose very quickly, and too much of it gets dumped into the blood at once. So then the cells can't use it all at once. It's kind of like overflowing your gas tank. The car can only store so much gas at a time. And then you'll end up with leftover glucose that's circulating through your blood vessels, which is causing damage to the lining of your blood vessels and ultimately to your organs. So one of the ways that you can slow down the conversion of glucose when you're eating carbohydrates is to add fat to it. So fat and protein. So in other words, a balanced meal. You have some protein, some fat, and some carbohydrates. Fat especially slows down the conversion of glucose. So what does that mean? For example, if you're eating vegetables, put some good quality butter on them, or use some olive oil, or cook with a good quality fat. Cook saute your vegetables in oil. And if you are going to eat something like bread, which I don't recommend if you're struggling with your blood sugar, butter will slow down the conversion of the glucose. So a lot of people avoid butter. They think it's not good for them. That's not true at all. Butter is a really nutritious food if you're eating good quality grass-fed butter. And I talk about that in my video called Fats, Are They Good or Bad? And I would like to do a video just on butter. Butter is one of my favorite topics. I just even like to say the word butter. So that's one of the tricks that we have people with blood sugar use when we need to slow down their processing food into glucose. So if you get your blood work done routinely to check and see how your blood sugar is doing, you probably are getting tested for something that's called an A1C, or also known as a glycosylated hemoglobin test. And that's a measure of how much glucose has been circulating around in your blood over a 90-day period. Your red blood cells live for 90 days, so it's like a snapshot of the past 90 days. So it is a pretty good overview of your body's ability to deal with sugar. So let's talk about, besides eating too much sugar, what else can impair your body's ability to get the glucose out of your blood and into your cells. And that would be that it's possible that you're not producing enough insulin, or something's going wrong with your insulin. So your pancreas is the organ that produces insulin. And as I mentioned earlier, insulin is the key that unlocks the cellular door to allow the glucose in. So when you're eating too much sugar, your pancreas is trying to keep up with it and producing insulin. And after a while, it can get burnt out and not be able to produce it anymore, right? So you literally have damage to the cells in the pancreas whose job it is to produce insulin. You can also, when you're overproducing it, create a problem called insulin resistance, where your cells no longer recognize the insulin. So the key is there, but it cannot open the lock anymore. So even though insulin might be present, it's not opening the cellular door, and the glucose can't get in, which all of which ends up leading to high blood sugar, which can also create many other complications, such as diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver syndrome and other hormonal issues, something we call metabolic syndrome, which I talk about in my video on how to more easily lose weight. And when you leave it uncontrolled, when you don't do anything about it, it will end up ultimately causing a slow, painful death. Every single organ in your body will break down, including your skin. I've seen severe diabetics with skin that looks like leather. Okay, so it is not a good way to live or to die. So I have some top tips about how to reduce your blood sugar naturally. And before I go into them, I just want to give a shout out to my sponsor and my partner in truth, called HATS, which stands for Hardcore Awakened Truth Seekers. And this movement was inspired into creation amidst all the hyper-political division in the past few years, with an attempt to get away from the polarization and bring people together across the political spectrum by having truth in common and creating a sense of community that allows us to move forward. And this movement is making real strides in achieving this vision. They have a great Telegram channel, which is very large and growing by the day. And they put videos and information out on there all day long. And they also have a site where you can buy some of their products. They have some lovely products. I'm wearing my HATS shirt here, and I have a bunch of them in different colors. I'm going to be ordering my hoodie pretty soon because it's starting to get chilly here now. I have my HATS mug here. That water tastes delicious in that mug. And they have yoga mats and organic tote bags and all kinds of cool stuff. So I urge you to check that out. I'll put the link on my description. And they're also in the process of building their own website. So I will put that up as soon as it's ready. So let's talk about how to, oh, and one more thing about that. If you use the code Cori Stern, all capital letters, CORISTERN, you will get a surprise discount if you use that code when you're checking out. So here's my top tips for preventing and or overcoming blood sugar issues. So number one would be stop eating sugar. Stop eating refined carbohydrates. You really shouldn't be eating it anyway, whether you have a blood sugar issue or not. All right. I truly do not believe that God intended for us to eat as much sugar as people eat, right? In nature, sugar is actually hard to access. You have to fight bees to get to honey. You have to get inside of a tree trunk to get maple syrup. If you really think it through, I don't think that we are supposed to be having such ready access to high volumes of sugar. So we do recommend that you eat good quality proteins, good quality fats, and lots of good quality vegetables. That's probably going to be the best diet for most people. If you need specific help with that, you can reach out to me. The next thing that you need to do is make sure you have enough zinc. Most people don't know this, but the pancreas is one of the largest users of zinc in the body. And guess what else zinc does? It stops the replication of viruses. That's why people with diabetes get sicker when they get a virus. They just don't have enough zinc to go around. Okay, so you cannot stabilize blood sugar if you're zinc deficient. And of course, I recommend the zinc from my favorite company, Standard Process. They have a couple of different zinc products I'll put on the description. We have zinc chelate, and we have one called Chesin, which also has some copper in it, along with a little bit of iron. The next supplement that I recommend is chromium. So chromium is a trace mineral, which actually makes insulin work better. And a lot of people with diabetes or blood sugar handling issues are chromium deficient. The chromium that I like the best is called Cataplex GTF. GTF stands for glucose tolerance factor. And that's again from my favorite company, Standard Process. If you go to my website, drcori.com, go to shop, click on shop Standard Process, you can get that. The next four, no, sorry, not yet. So the next one I'm going to talk about, the next herb I'm going to mention is called gymnema. Gymnema is an herb that actually helps restore the insulin producing glands in the pancreas. So most people think that once their pancreas stops producing insulin, and they become insulin dependent. They have to actually inject themselves with insulin. That's it. They're done. But gymnema can actually help heal your pancreas, right? The other cool thing about gymnema is if you suck on it, it is a bitter herb. It makes sugar taste terrible. So it's a good way to help yourself reduce your sugar cravings. And if you want good quality gymnema, everything that I'm going to talk about now is going to be herbs. I can't sell those on my website, but you can get in touch with me. You can email me at holisticdoc13@gmail.com. I'll put that on my description, and we can get you the best quality herbs available. So the next 4 I'm going to talk about actually all come in one supplement, but I'm going to break it down. So the first one is cinnamon, and cinnamon has been actually shown to imitate the action of insulin. And there's different types of cinnamon. A lot of people don't know that. Several different types, but the one that works in this capacity is called the Ceylon cinnamon. The next herb is called bitter melon, and that actually helps to lower blood sugar. And you can eat it. You can get a bitter melon and eat it, but a lot of people don't like the taste of it. It's very bitter. It's easier to take it in tablet form. And the next one is black cumin seed. Some people just call it black seed. And black seed helps to increase your insulin production and decrease insulin resistance. What the saying about black cumin seed is that it cures everything but death. So it's good for a lot of other things, including the immune system, and has been shown to help prevent viruses, and good for allergies too. And then the last herb that I'm going to mention is fenugreek. And fenugreek helps to lower blood glucose, and it has other great properties too. It helps to increase breast milk production. It's also a natural stool softener. So it's a great herb. It helps to thin mucus. So it's good for people with congestion. So the cinnamon, bitter melon, black cumin seed, and fenugreek are all rolled into one product called Metabol Complex. Metabol Complex, I'll put that on the description. So it makes it easier. You don't have to take 4 different things. And it is great for blood sugar problems and any metabolic syndrome issues, like I mentioned before, with non-alcoholic fatty liver and obesity and all of the other things, hormonal imbalances that go along with it. So that's it for now. I'm sorry this was a little bit of a longer video, but I had a lot to say about it. It's a very important topic. I would love it if you have not yet subscribed to the channel to please do so, and also make sure you hit the like button if you did like the video, if it was helpful, because it does help other people to find it. It really makes a difference. And lastly, and most importantly, please share this video with anybody that you know that you think would receive help from it. And thank you so much for tuning in, and stay well, and I'll see you all again soon.